And Peter, why don't you go first since Elaine has had for a while.
Disagreements with Elaine?
Smart man.
You know, I took a few notes. I thought her testimony was great, and I should, in the interest of full disclosure, I should say that my wife is a member of the Commission on Children. So. But I was very struck by what Elaine began with about how father involvement affects baby cognition and children with disabilities. That when you have a child where the father is missing, that child shows problems. And Elaine zeroed in on gender differences and said, look, there is a difference between fathers and mothers, and fathers and mothers do have different positive effects on children, and so therefore you need both. And Elaine asked several very important questions. What helps a family function? How do we get the father back into the story? And I think that's crucial. And you know, where I'm coming from, my answer is marriage gets the father back into the story, or helps prevents the father from ever exiting the story to begin with. But you know, what I'm talking about is almost sort of a baseline, the basics. I mean, the floor. I mean, Elaine, I think, is she's reaching for the ceiling, and that's important too when she asks what helps a family function. And Representative Morris, I mean, you posed these questions to me during my Q&A. Okay, beyond marriage, what can we do to make sure that fathers are involved with their families, even if the marriage question is answered and a father is present, whether in a middle-class situation or in the situations that Elaine talked about, the more difficult situations. And of course, that's crucial. You know, what helps a family function? The emphasis in where Elaine and I, where our emphases, I don't know that there was necessarily any disagreement between our two testimonies, but there was a difference in emphasis. And hers was more economic. She said that as Elaine sees it, jobs are of equal importance to marriage. And you know, you're standing right here if I misrepresent any of your testimony. Yeah, that jobs are of equal importance to marriage. You know, I don't think I necessarily disagree with that. I would say though that you know, there was a federal official here, oh gosh, about a year ago. It made the front page of the Current, speaking in Hartford at some conference, and he made the connection between marriage and poverty reduction. That marriage actually is one of the best programs for reducing poverty, for employment, statistically. There we go. There we go. And I was very, very impressed by, you know, to me that what that gentleman said closed the loop. And Brookings, yeah, Brookings is a middle-of-the-road institution, and you know, I liked what he said because I think it closes the loop between my testimony and Elaine's testimony. You can get the father back through employment, forgiveness. I got a little question mark in my mind next to that. Maybe Elaine could expand on that, because not necessarily that I disagree, but I was curious, I was intrigued, and I was wondering if she could expand on employment, forgiveness, or was it employment forgiveness? And you know, part of what threw me was for some reason, I found myself focusing on the actual printed word here. It wasn't always, you know. I mean, it's the question. I think the question for me, underlying Elaine's testimony, is what's the best way to have the father involved in the child's life? And then I would say marriage. Marriage is the best way to make sure that the father's involved in the child's life. But her emphasis on gender-based differences, I'm in complete agreement. And that intrinsic connection, that, as Elaine said, that intrinsic connection that goes back to basic biology. That's my summary of her, which excellent testimony as always. Tell Leslie I said that.
Elaine, if you'd like to comment on Peter's.
Sure. Well, I thought Peter's testimony was erudite, and the research was compelling. I particularly liked the idea, and think it's worth pursuing, of the marriage license and a course that would help those who get married learn a little bit more about how to stay together. We do have in our state a law to be quite proud of that helps fathers and mothers when they divorce learn that law doesn't say don't divorce, but it tells them to stay involved with the children, and it teaches that, and actually you can't get divorced without taking that course here. And we worked with Judy Wallerstein, who's a real expert on the impact of divorce on children, to help us write that law. So we made sure that everything we put in that law was research-based, and by the end of crafting that law, it got the votes of both houses proudly. But I think we don't do enough to help people know how to stay in marriage and how to sustain marriage. So I thought that was a wonderful idea too. You know, I think the trick is figuring out how to incentivize things. So incentivizing by decreasing the cost of the marriage license if you took that course is a really great idea. I agree with Peter. I think we're looking at this from a different angle. Sort of we're looking at the mountain different ways. And I'm focusing on the father-child relationship and how to bring the dad back. And Peter's focused on how to get the dad there in the first place. There's a lot of people who aren't getting married at all. So it's not about divorce. They're choosing to never marry. I had opportunity to live and work in Sweden. And one of the things that was so surprising to me there was they have a higher divorce rate than we do, much higher. But every dad's involved, and there's no such thing as a missing father. So that is a country where you don't see that it actually is divorce that leads to father absence or fathers not connecting and they're contributing and child support's good. And the Sweden lesson seems to me to be, and I was there and my son's an athlete, so I would be at games and I'd be surrounded by these dads. And I talked to them and they were all thoroughly engaged and they were equally engaged with their daughters. And when I asked, because I was flabbergasted compared to our country, because the divorce rate is so high, it seemed more to do with the social supports and the jobs and the economics than about the structure of marriage. I'm not naive. I don't want to be an ideologue. I think marriage is very important. And in full disclosure, before I worked for the Connecticut legislature, I was staff at the California legislature. And my final job in the California legislature was to be chief of staff on family policy. And I wrote the first family policy for any state, for California, and worked a lot with David Blankenhorn. And what I've learned, I loved working with David Blankenhorn, and we actually together worked on family impact statements. So I'm very interested in Peter's presentation. I think the issues are salient, but I've come to sort of figure out how far a car goes with what gasoline. And I don't think we will ever solve the marriage problem, but I think we can solve the problem of how to get dads back. So I'm just being efficient. I think it's an easier car on the state policy level. So we perhaps have less difference than we have strategic difference in efficiencies. I think we'll get father and get dads back for kids going this other route. I think that the marriage issue is you cannot legislate marriage. It's about values and culture, as you said earlier. It's a tad more complicated, and but I think that these other policy solutions have shown some impact as well as cost savings.
Thank you, Elaine. I want to thank you both. I just have to make one brief comment. Fascinating, the early childhood brain development that you were talking about. And I have to mention this because I always talk about it. There was a book I read many, many years ago called The Art of Loving by Eric Fromm. And he talked about a different kind of love that you get from your mother versus your father. Interesting, he didn't make that gender-based. He said there's a mother love and a father love. It didn't have to be gender-based. But that those different kinds of love were both needed and complementary. And it was paralleling exactly what you were saying today about that kind of complementary effects that mothers and fathers have on children. And it was, I recommend that book to everybody.
Thank you.
Representative Connor.
Thanks, Senator. I want to thank both of you this afternoon. Both of your testimonies have been very, very profound this afternoon. think all of us will say that one common denominator to marriage first is love. And Ms. Zimmerman, I think you really articulated the point that after the love, it's education and economics or jobs. So I think the charge of this task force, I think one of this aspects of this task force in terms of looking at the front end, looking at the back end, and with bringing the fathers back, I think that's a mission that we all can work on. And I think the front end, being proactive, is very important as well, and that's the jobs, economic status in terms of the mother and father having a good education, going on to college. And I think having an education and having a job, those two aspects are very important in terms of eventually marriage. So I think we can work, or we have to be cognizant of not just regaining or recapturing the fathers back into the family structure, but what can we do on the front end that will save the family, that will save the taxpayers without, incarcerating. So I think that, we have our task cut out, but with the information that you've given us or provided us this afternoon, it's going to lead to a lot of positive, resolutions that we as a committee will definitely take into consideration. So thank you again.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, in conclusion, I'd like to thank both of you for phenomenal presentations, information, not just giving us the problem, but giving us some solutions that we seriously consider, and whether you get back to us with some more information, both of you, and we'll be talking to you, members of the commission, Elaine, on how we get hold of some of those resources that you've offered for us. A concluding remark for me, whether it's the marriage or whatever, I listened to the discussion that you're both were a minister as well, and I said, it's interesting, the marriage piece. And they do a lot of marriage counseling as well, but any marriage counselor will tell you that typically there's three areas that relationship either breaks down in. It's either sexual relations, communications, or finances. So it's interesting that even though you came from it from the financial standpoint, the finances have a lot to do with it. And it was interesting, the statistic you gave earlier, that 95% of the males out there just do not have the resources to even make themselves attractive. So even if we're to sustain a union or whatever, money has a lot to do with it. So we need to focus on those things. Again, it's the chicken or the egg. It's all still connected. One last piece I'd just like to share that just happened this weekend, because I know we have some other gentlemen that are here with us, Doug and others who've been involved in fatherhood initiatives and doing fantastic work in that regard. In the city of Norwalk, and I say this primarily to you, I guess, Peter, and other people in the faith community that are listening. There's a new organization that just started. It's called Fairfield County Women United. And they had their first get-together on this Sunday, and over 300 women came together as a result of the violence and things that happened in the community. It was a matter of the faith community of women coming together to mentor other women. So as we talk about fatherhood programs and things like that, you're right, government can't do it all. It's good to see that whether it's the faith community or other non-profit organizations come together and step up and recognize a role. Because everybody's talking about women mentoring other women, and standing in the gap and making up the hedge. So fantastic. We look forward to it. We will notify everyone about our next meeting by way of email. And we normally give you a date at the end of this, but we're still trying to coordinate something. Know that it will happen within the next 2 weeks, if not a week. We may have something happen within a week. We're just trying to pin something down. But again, thank you to the both of you, and thank you for everyone that came. That's our conclusion. Have a great week.